I remember once Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, his son, because he sees people all day long that have problems. And one of the things in the Mathara, it says that if you don't have problems, then your role is to help other people resolve their problems. And if you don't do that, Allah will bring you problems. And so his son said to him, can't we just have one day without problems? And Shaykh Abdullah said, Azil al-kibrak min qalbak. Get that arrogance out of your heart. He said, do you think the prophets ever had a day without trouble? And that's again gets back to that the people of the greatest tribulation are the people that are closest to Allah. And that's the nature of the abode. And one of the biggest problems for human beings is not recognizing the nature of the abode. Ibn Atta'illah, he says that the al-faqat, a'yad al-arifin, that calamities and tribulations are the eids of the people that know God. Because they know that that's the nature of the abode. So they take them as opportunities. And the Prophet ﷺ said that none of you's belief will be complete until he sees tribulations as blessings and blessings as tribulations. And that's very hard for people to get their heads around, because people want everything to be nice, and that's not the abode we're in. That's the next abode, inshallah, if you acted accordingly here. So I think the biggest problem that we all have is our nafs. You know, that the Prophet ﷺ said, your worst enemy is the nafs that resides between your two sides. And we have the seven, the spiritual path is a progressive path. Nafs al-amara, nafs al-lawama, nafs al-mulhama, nafs al-mutma'inna, nafs al-radiya, nafs al-mardiya, and then nafs al-kamila. And the people we met, we saw some of them that arguably had reached that. So it is possible. And I remember Murabbit al-Hajj told me something when I was reading Ibn Ashur with him, and it said, يُجَاهِدُ نَفْسُهُ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ وَيَتَحَلَّ بِمَقَامَةِ الْيَقِينَ, that he struggles with his soul for the sake of Allah. And he adorns himself with the stations of certainty. When we got to that line, I said, what if you're like, you struggle and then you just keep falling back? And he said, that's the struggle. Like that's what you have to do. And I was with Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya. We were in Kuwait in an airport, and this soccer team, one of the professional soccer teams, came in, and one of the soccer players came up to him. He was dressed and looked very, sagely, and he came up and he said, Shaykh, mumkin as'aluk su'al, can I ask a question? He said, go ahead. He said, I have iman, but I keep doing things, and then astaghfirullah, I ask Allah forgiveness, and then I go back and I do them, and then I ask Allah forgiveness. And what do I do? And Shaykh Abdullah just said, istimir, keep going. Keep going. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things. Ibn al-Munkadir, who was the great teacher of Malik, he's one of the great fuqaha of Medina, he said, I fought with myself for 50 years until it finally surrendered. And I think that's, one of the things the Taoists say, the reason the Taoists are so obsessed with health, they do a lot of like all these qigong and things to cultivate health, is they say you owe it to your soul to live at least 70 or 80 years. Because that's how long it takes to get ready to go to the next. So this is an opportunity, and it's a carpe diem opportunity. If we don't see it as that and just recognize, and the best thing that you can do is prayer on time. That is the single best thing. And try to have more presence in the prayer, to try to focus as best possible, to make it better. It's, people, a great musician or a great writer they just practice. When you see drafts, like Brian Garner says, the books he writes go through about 80 drafts. Of course. And these great musicians that show up they just practice and practice till they get to that point where they can play it flawlessly. Well, we forget that these daily rituals that we do, they're practice.
And they're practice, yes.
it's to get better at it. So every day is just another day to try to hone our presence more. So I think those, and then there's a baseline. Everybody has a baseline of practice, and then you build on that. So the most basic baseline is just belief in Allah, the 5 prayers, and avoiding the haram.
Yeah.
And then you just build on that. I mean, there's a hadith, whoever prays 4 of nafila before dhuhr and 4 after, the fire will never touch them.
Allah,
so that's a worthwhile practice. And people that do those constantly, they're going to, or the one I really adhere to is the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever recites Ayatul Kursi after every fard prayer, there's nothing between him and paradise except death.